All right, guys, in this one, we're going to be talking about the radial filter. So this one is very similar to the graduated filter we looked at in the prior video, only this time the shape that you create with it is more of a circle. So this is a good example of how to use this filter. I like to think of it as a way to call out certain spots in the photo, or a place that you kind of want to draw the viewer's eye into is kind of primarily what this can be used for, or how I generally like to use it. Again, you can use any of these tools however you want to create whatever you want. This is art here, first and foremost. But for my particular tastes, this is how I like to use this tool. So here's an example where we have a subject who's right in the center of the photo, and we kind of want to draw the eye in a little bit, almost like a natural vignette. You can see that there's no vignetting going on here. And, if we were to use the vignetting part of the edit, which I'll get into later, we can do a vignetting from a lens correction standpoint, kind of drag it in a little bit here, and you can see it kind of makes a little tunnel, brings your eyes into the center. But the vignette is kind of bound to the outer parts. I don't like using the effects vignette because that just looks almost a little bit too fake. And a little bit too harsh, but kind of what I like to do is use this radial filter. It just gives you a little bit more control. You can see I'm clicking and dragging outward from the center, and it creates a circle that you can move around, almost kind of like a spotlight. And again, it's only looking like a spotlight because we have our exposure dialed down a ton, but I'm going to bring it up a little bit. You can see we have our circle. We can click and drag on these different points and change the shape however we want. I might drag it in just a little bit. If we, again, hover over the point, you can see the mask. Anything that's in the red is going to be affected by the sliders. So the circle comes with a feather that we might want to drag outward a little bit. And you want to be careful. If you go all the way with the feather, you can see the hard edge of the circle, but as you start to slowly drag in, that feather becomes a little bit more gradual. You can see something like this is a little bit better. So here's the effect completely off, but we want to drag the exposure down just a touch to something like this. It's subtle. You don't see the actual edge of a vignette happening, but with a subtle adjustment like this, it pulls your eyes in just a little bit to the center part of the photo, since the outer edge is a little dark. So something else to consider too with the radial filter, there's an invert button here, and what it does is if you check it, it flips the settings around so that the mask is inside the circle. So now all of our settings are affecting what's inside the circle rather than outside. So if I drag my exposure down, you can see it's only impacting the center part of the circle, or maybe we want to drag it all the way up, have a bright spotlight. But that's what the invert does. It switches the circle from outside to inside. But I think this is something like this is pretty good. And again, you might find that if this edge looks too harsh, you might have to come back in here and play with it a little bit. You drag it too far to the right, then more of what's in the circle is going to get impacted by the adjustment. But I think in this example, something like here is pretty good. All right, let's move on to another example. So here's another example where I would use this photo to drag a little bit more attention to the subject down here. And what you can do is, again, have your exposure down a little bit, have some standard settings here, and then click and drag out from the middle. We have our spotlight. Now, this is obviously way too dark. I'm going to drag this up a little bit. Something like this, maybe. And then our edge, you want to be careful with this because, again, we don't want a hard edge like this. It's going to look kind of silly. So I'm going to drag it in just a little bit. You can see you go back and forth like that, you can almost see the circle here. So we might want to bring the feather out just a little bit more. I think that is better. Might even be a little bit too much. Might then drag the circle out a little bit further or after. So there you can see now we've kept some saturation, some detail in the clouds, or in the sky rather, while we've kept our subjects properly exposed. So there's another example of the radial filter. Let's see if we have another one here. Something else you can do with the radial filter, you can get a little creative with it. So here's an example of that lighthouse shot that I took, this time in color from a different angle from the one that's been in black and white that we've been working with. You can see the light was on this morning, but you know, in some cases you might find the lights are off, or there's like a street light that's off, but you kind of wish it was lit up for the photo. You can use this radial filter to kind of create some poor man's effects, if you will. So what I'm going to do here is invert the circle. So what's happening with our settings takes place inside. And I'll start with something like this. And then I'll start to bring the exposure up a little bit. You can kind of see where I'm going with this here. If I bring the feather up a little bit, we don't want a hard edge, remember, that looks silly. But if we feather it a little bit, it looks like you can make it look like that a light or something was on. Might even bring this down a little bit. Don't want it too noticeable. And then you can use the color swatch here to have a color overlay. So I can crank up the orange or the yellow a little bit. Something like that. And maybe bring it down just a touch. Bring the feather. So now you can see, let me press H to hide the pen. You can see before, after. It just adds a little bit of a glow effect to the light, almost like one of those Thomas Kincaid paintings that you'd see at the mall. Anyway, so that's how you can use this this radial tool to create some sort of interesting effects. If you have like a street light or a window or something that you want lit up, you can kind of fake it a little bit. So that's it for the radial filter. In the next one, we're going to get into the adjustment brush. Please, if you like the video, please subscribe, like it, share on social media, ask questions, leave comments, and hopefully I can get to them in a later video. So thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.